Welcome to the Media Roundtable. This is our last episode of 2021. We've been talking a lot this season to leading podcasters about the shows they create, why they create them, and the impact that they have on the world. And our hope is that whether you're a listener and you're just trying to find good stuff to add to your podcast list, or whether you're in the advertising community, we want you to have a chance to better understand the content that's out there, and so you can feel good about what you consume and what you support. As always, I'm your host, Dan Granger, and today is a very special episode for a few reasons. One, it's our recap episode. So we're not going to introduce new guests this episode, but what we're going to do is a bit of a retrospective look back at the different conversations that we've had over the last few months. And we're going to look at how we're doing against the central promise that we made at the beginning of the season to make this more of an unboxing type of experience, so you could understand shows from scratch and get a really clear view of what they're, not just what they are, but like why do they exist and how do they relate to the values that we're trying to advance with the Media Roundtable. Now, I have done a lot of arm twisting and cajoling to make this episode extra special, and the consequence of that is that we get to be joined by none other than the Jennifer Laine. Jennifer, if you don't remember her from our Knights of the Media Roundtable episode back at the beginning of the year, Jennifer is our head of marketing at Oxford Road, which is the ad agency that makes all of this possible. She is also the executive director of Media Roundtable and oversees everything that we do for the podcast or for our focus in the marketplace to bring the values that we purport on MediaRoundtable.com, to bring those into reality. And so welcome, Jennifer. It's nice that you're able to suspend all of your objections for a minute and come on the show today.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and I would be a huge hypocrite if I didn't come on, because believing in this and supporting it so much, I would definitely have to sort of put my name on it and put my face in front of it. Otherwise, you'd have to get me in trouble or find a new producer. So thank you.
Yeah, indeed. It's good to have you here. And of course, this is being released the week of Thanksgiving 2021. So happy Thanksgiving to you.
Likewise.
I'm very grateful for you and all the work that you do for the cause here. One thing I've been looking at is, where did Thanksgiving come from as a holiday? One thing I thought was interesting is that it was actually something it was first formally made a national holiday in the U.S. During the Civil War in a proclamation by Abraham Lincoln. Now, it was actually written by Secretary of State William Seward. But the interesting thing is, imagine what was going on in 1864 when they first made it a holiday. You had the country in the tail end of a devastating civil war, people dying left and right, hostility everywhere. You talk about, social civil unrest on a scale that nobody's ever seen before. And what did they decide was one thing that they could do as a country to bring people together and deal with all of the chaos that was surrounding them was to pause and to take a moment to be grateful and to look around and to say, okay, what is good about what's happening in the world in which we live? And how do we find time not just to dwell on all of the pain and the suffering that's going around, but how can we figure out on what we have to be thankful for? And so I think it's a special Thanksgiving and very much needed now that we're ending year 2 of this very peculiar pandemic with all of its cascading events and consequences as a result of it. I think Thanksgiving couldn't come at a better time.
No, I couldn't agree more. And there's so much we all have to be thankful for this year, with the state of how things are opening up and family and friends being a little bit more healthy this year than they were last year, and just being able to see them and give them a hug and celebrate a great meal together. So I know we aren't necessarily coming out of a civil war, but we are coming out of a war of some type that has been hard on all of us. So.
For sure. And, we've had a lot of good discussion this season with people, a lot of guests to be grateful for. But, on the topic of civil war, no, we're not having that, although the death toll from the pandemic is reaching those proportions.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, we've seen a lot of research come out to suggest that there are a lot of people in this country that believe it's time to secede, and a very high number of Republicans. It was like 50% of Trump voters, and I think we saw that 42% of Biden voters believe that it is time for states to break up. So it is something to remain mindful of. And look, what we're trying to do with Media Roundtable is actually do our part from where we sit. And where we sit is really interesting because we deal with a lot of brands and a lot of media. And we know that media has played a big role in mostly dividing us because it's been a very profitable thing to do. We're still trying to figure out how to deal with the internet. And what does that mean? I think we'll be sorting out, how do we actually manage this thing for the next century? But it's led to some serious consequences, and people have been very, very divided. But one thing I'll tell you that I'm specifically grateful for this season, when I look back and reflect, is that we've been talking to a lot of people, particularly since we rebooted in the fall, that have a very different approach and outlook than what gets the most ink in the media. In other words, if we talk about the outrage industrial complex and how there's so much money in being the loudest voice, whether that's on social media or cable news or whatever it is, there's so much attention about the food fights that are happening in public. I think when we started doing this series, I felt like that's all that there was, and it's a very it's not a very hopeful situation when all you're seeing is the conflict. But in the course of doing these interviews and talking to some of the people that we've had a chance to visit with, I'm increasingly encouraged about the work that is being done to walk some of this back, to unwind some of the chaos, and to get. And we have talked to so many people this season that are really focused on lowering the temperature, on listening, on having empathy and compassion for people across differences. And we've heard this from all sides of the political spectrum. We've heard it from multiple disparate groups of individuals that you might not expect to have that type of an approach, but it's really been heartening for me. And I'm just so grateful that there are people that are out there doing the work, because it makes me feel a little bit less crazy. And it also, for my own benefit, what we cover on this show influences who I'm listening to and what voices I'm paying attention to over the course of a week. And I'm finding that I'm hearing a lot more unifying voices and a lot of depolarizing voices than I ever did before. So it's interesting. One of the ancillary byproducts of doing this show that's been a real benefit is just that it gives me peace of mind. I feel a little bit less crazy and a little bit more hopeful that not everybody does want to see this country fall apart, and that some people are using media as a tool and as a lever to try to bring some stability and unity where possible.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Please. Oh, no. I was just going to add, and in using the tool for that, I think, and even those who aren't necessarily using their tool in that way, they are being less combative overall across the board. I mean, I'm not speaking for everyone. There's still those voices out there who want to pick a fight or want everybody to believe that they're right. But I don't know if it's related to people just sick of fighting or people actually wanting unity, but having now been doing this for, a year and a half together. I mean, thinking back to where we were season 1, just in podcast news and the news cycle in general, I think the temperature has lowered so significantly and everybody can breathe just a little bit more safely and with a little bit less anxiety. And so I think we're all grateful for that.
Well, it's interesting. So the thing I can't figure out is because I'm experiencing what you're describing, but I don't know if it's what everybody is experiencing because we're kind of away from the 2020 election, or it's just who we're surrounding ourselves with. Is that what is making everything feel like the temperature is coming down, or is it really coming down? Hard to say. So we're going to go through and give you a brief kind of recap episode by episode. Look at this as like a highlights reel. where Jennifer and I are going to be sharing our perspective. But before we get into all that, Jennifer, because you're here, can you share with the audience a little bit about the work that we've been doing and that largely you've been leading, that goes beyond the podcast, so people can understand what we're really doing with Media Roundtable to make a difference toward our vision?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you guys who aren't aware of the Media Roundtable, it was an organization that we established at the first part of 2020 that was really committed to 6 core values. And those values, I won't go into too much detail, but they're available on our website, mediaroundtable.com. And those are clarity, truth, fairness, respect, de-escalation, and tolerance. And we chose these after a lot of debate and a lot of outside input to act as a North Star for the type of content that not only we wanted to create, but the type of content that we wanted to support. So through the work that Dan and the entire team at Oxford Road are doing at the Media Roundtable, putting hundreds of millions of dollars every year behind podcast hosts and radio hosts and personalities and into networks, we wanted to make sure that the dollars that we are spending with those hosts and in those networks were supporting something that was trying to make the world at least a little bit of a better place, if not just a neutral place. Quite frankly, that would have been a big win for us at different parts over the last 2 years. But to try to find positive attributes and to try to find people who were counter programming, who were trying to hear from both sides, who were able to debate an issue but not be too hard on a person, who were able to dive into tough topics, research them with multiple sources, confirm what was true and what wasn't true, and really use their platform to help the audience not just understand what was happening, but to understand the full context of what was happening and to have it relate to them in a way that wasn't combative or alienating or harsh or aggressive. And so we put together the organization. We invited a number of different people to be a part of it from different companies and organizations to make sure that we had influences from the brand side, from the government side, from the agency side, and from the educational side to not just provide sort of our agenda or push our agenda. We wanted to make sure we had people who would challenge the way we were thinking, challenge the way we were doing it as well. And the whole point of this is to champion voices who may not be getting enough recognition, or to really promote voices that do have larger platforms, but they're using that and they're respecting that platform in a way that makes all of us come together. And if it isn't able to bring us together, at least makes us understand a little bit more about what the issues are.
Do you mind if we just go a little bit deeper into some of the things that we're doing beyond the show itself? Because I do want the audience to have some perspective on, like that we're trying to do this as a service to the audience and to the advertising community, but you're also leading some initiatives, and I know you can't share everything that we're doing, but if you can at least tease a little bit some of the work that we're doing to try to make this real at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Dan mentioned, we aren't able to share everything, although stay tuned. We have a pretty big announcement coming out in Q1 of next year that we're really excited with. And we will be, we will keep you on the tips of your toes right now because we can't talk about it too much. But before we're able to share that with you, we have been really putting a lot of effort into making sure that we're creating tools for our ad buying teams and our planning teams, so they know that they can feel confident promoting these to brands. So for each of the podcasts that we have on our show and for the top 500 podcasts, we are really trying to create a content rating system that speaks to the GARM framework. And we'll put it on our website so you're able to understand what the GARM framework is, but it's based around brand safety, number one, but also brand suitability. And so it's easy to see a list of shows and to know what's performing well, to know what the rates are, to know who the audience is, to know whether or not you want to buy it. But our aim as an agency and the tools that we've been utilizing internally are tools that help you know not just the demographic information, but also the suitability information. And so we rank all of the shows by client, and whether they're red, yellow, or green, right away if this is something that you should be considering based on the brand values that you have told us that you want to embrace. This way, our media team goes in with a red, yellow, and green plan. And anyone in the green plan is somebody that we would automatically recommend. Anyone in the yellow area is somebody that it's definitely worth having a conversation about. It may or may not be a fit at this time, but it's somebody who's producing good content, but it could be on the fringe of where you may or may not feel comfortable. There could be alcohol references, and you may be a brand that targets or that has products that are related to children, and that doesn't make you feel comfortable. And so each of them are doing great things, but it definitely comes down to what your target is. And then in the red zone, those are shows that we don't necessarily feel are upholding the values of the Media Roundtable. We don't think they're making the decision to use their platform for good all the time, and there are shows that we're really hesitant to promote. And this formula has really helped us in guiding the brands that we work with to make sure that their marketing is really purpose driven and not just driven based on metrics and KPIs and ROI.
So just to recap that back to you, and then we'll get into the good stuff. So in addition to highlighting shows that are maybe worth sponsoring or listening to on this podcast, we have values, and what we're trying to help the marketing community do is media planning against their values, so we can assess the values of a brand and the values of a program and help them also match. So for so long, marketing has been like, I need to reach men 18 to 34 with household income above 75,000, right? And it's like, there's still a place for that type of advertising, but to be able to target based on values is something different and very reflective of what the types of solutions that are needed in the fragmented media world that we now live in. That's what we're trying to bring to bear. And so, Jennifer, thank you for leading the charge on that.
Yeah.
Now I'll stop avoiding the question about
you can stop avoiding, though it is like helping our clients market with purpose is definitely something that we should be spending a lot of time on. So it wasn't wasted time. But now, without further ado, episode 1, Rudy Giuliani.
You're going to throw me in at the deep end. Yeah. So I really enjoyed this episode, and it's hard because, Rudy is like probably, count on one hand, top most polarizing figures in America right now. I'm sure he's on a very short list of individuals. I think there are a lot of people that would say, you kind of have to figure out what you do with him. Do you shame him and call him out? Do you pick a fight with him? Do you just talk about him and talk about negative things that you feel that he's said or done? Do you ignore him completely and just try to not give oxygen to things he's saying that a lot of people would call misinformation or even disinformation? Or do you engage in a conversation? I think this is a very complex issue, and there are people that are going to immediately say, you shouldn't talk to him. You shouldn't give him the airtime. And I guess I take a different approach. And I know that can be controversial, but I want this program to be a forum where it is safe to talk to people who represent all kinds of different views, including a lot of views that I might personally disagree with. Now, I don't disagree with Rudy on everything, but it was interesting because I feel like in the interview, we saw two different Rudys. And that's one thing that really stood out to me is that, we talked about this guy's story, and you're talking about a guy, like most of us found out who he was on 9/11. But for everybody else, like, this guy had been on the national stage for a long time. The guy took on the mob. Okay. He was, probably second to Robert Kennedy Jr., or I'm sorry, RFK the first, right? In terms of dealing a blow to organized crime in this country, to actually prosecute the 5 families in New York, that normal people can't do that. Normal people wouldn't do that. They wouldn't take on the risk to do that. To have John Gotti motion for your assassination and put a price on your head because you believe in justice, and there were probably some other spoils for him too. But that just requires something else in people. And I think the Rudy Giuliani that most of us have seen over the course of his public life, I think sometimes we see the 9/11 one that was like a unifying figure for that 5-minute period in this country's history where the whole country was like, go America. and there wasn't all of this fracture that we're seeing before and have been seeing increasingly so afterwards. And so we've got this image of him as a uniting figure, and then you've got this whole last chapter where he's arm in arm with Trump and as divisive as you could imagine. But you have to remember, this guy was a prosecutor. This guy's primary job, the thing that really put him on the map, was that he would collect all the information that he could get his hands on. He'd throw a lot of it at the wall, and through the legal system, see what sticks. And now what's kind of interesting is I've been, trying to pay attention to, what his world is and why does he do things the way that he does them now. I see very much a similar approach where he has thrown a lot of commentary about the Biden administration, the Biden family. He's taken a lot of positions where he's throwing things at the wall. Some of them are sticking and some of them are not. A lot of them are not, but he's saying it all with a lot of conviction. Now, if you're a prosecutor, that's probably not an unusual approach to take. When you're a public figure and somebody that we saw on 9/11, and then we saw seek nomination for the Republican ticket for the presidency not too long ago, and you see him in these broader roles, you don't expect that type of behavior. And I think it has really been jarring for people and really divisive for people to witness him taking a prosecutorial approach. And many people would argue that he's been playing fast and loose with the facts. On the other hand, he may not be as wrong about everything that he says. And you have to pay close attention to what he says when he gets into modern day, because I think he even said some things in the interview that we didn't run because we didn't believe that they would hold up through the scrutiny of fact checking. That was an interesting position for us to be in. So long story short, I think that if you listen to the episode with Rudy, I mean, if you told me 15 years ago that we'd have Rudy Giuliani on a podcast the week of 9/11's 20th anniversary, I wouldn't believe it. But the world has changed so much. I think that there is a lot to learn from his story. And from the first few chapters, you may part ways with him, as many people would, as you get to the most recent chapter. But the question we all have to ask ourselves, is it worth going there? Is it worth coming face to face with the things that you may find very distasteful in what he has to say or how he says it? And you may violently disagree with his approach. My belief is it's a good conversation to have. It's interesting as long as you're not giving unchecked, without accountability, error to things that you don't believe can be factually supported. That's my position on it.
I'm going to jump right in because that's the hardest part that I had with this episode. In a spirit of full disclosure, I really pushed back against having Rudy on the show. I felt that it was going to be too challenging to present the true version of himself and the truth as we wanted to share it with our audience. And I didn't want to edit him too much as to where it wasn't the Rudy that he was trying to get the audience to understand. And it wasn't the Rudy that we have seen on other outlets. But I also didn't want misinformation or disinformation being shared with our audience. So that for me was a really difficult challenge. And we did end up editing a lot of the episode, not a lot, but we edited enough of the episode because he was stating things that were factually incorrect after we double and triple checked. And so I still have mixed feelings about that episode. But I did want to make sure that we were presenting a very strong view from the right side at some point in this series. And you don't get a more known voice on the right than Rudy Giuliani. So
not many. It's a short list. Yeah. But,
it's a short list.
No, and I appreciate you going with me on that. And look, it was a big deal that he even was willing to come, but also I understand that, this is a complex time we live in. And I don't even think, I think we all have to have a lot of grace and room for each other's perspective, because I think there are a million people, if we talk to everyone in America about this very topic, you'd have a contingency of people up in arms that we would have the conversation with him. And then you'd have this equal number of people on the other extreme saying, Rudy's right, how dare you question him? And, so where I come down on this stuff is, our table is round. It's a very round table. And like, let's be honest, we may not agree with a lot of what Rudy says. You may agree with some things that I don't agree with, and vice versa. But he represents so many people in this country. And I think that it is important, the more we can understand the people, no matter how violently we disagree with their perspectives, I think it's important that we engage in conversation. I think it's important that we build relationships, because that's the
whole
only
point
way
of the Media
gets anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard, but you're right. You don't want to be responsible for spreading, things that are untrue, but it's also hard because like he's talking about media bias. I believe there is media bias. I mean, we had Frank Sesno on, the CNN bureau chief. What does he say? He says, oh, when I was at CNN way before the era of Trump and all that, he says, I found media bias to be a real phenomenon against the right. And so it's like, there are some things that he's the only one that you're going to hear say, and some of those things are true, and some of those things may not be true. And it's very, very confusing. It's very conflicting. And everybody that is listening is hearing different sources that will either tell him that take whatever Rudy says to the bank or dismiss everything that he says. And, I think the way that you and I have really worked well on this whole undertaking is that I think we come from a different position, which is like, there really isn't that much black and white. There's a lot of gray. And, we have to do our best to operate in that type of environment and judge as little as possible in the process.
And then if we fast forward to episode 2, Lindsey Graham will be just the person to paint the entire picture of what happened 20 years from now in America History Tellers. Then we'll have the history as black and white.
All right, fine. We can talk about the next episode. So the Rudy thing was complex. And honestly, just to recap it for advertisers, what we try to do is not say can, can't, should, shouldn't, because those are very strict rules to adhere by. And, there are some messages that are worth sharing in any environment. And there are some messages that should be restricted to places that only are congruent with the values of the person that has the message to spread. And in his particular case, I think that, some advertisers have made a strategic decision that they want to market to Trump loyalists, to people that are in that camp or constituency. And it's not really for us to tell them you can't or you shouldn't, but simply to go, okay, where do your values line up? Where do your beliefs line up? And what stands are you taking as a company? Does that jive? If there's a fit, okay, that could be a fit for you. But Rudy is probably one of the most challenging. Like if you're trying to avoid controversy, he set the bar on most likely to generate controversy of everybody that we talk to. Beyond him, everyone else that we're about to talk about, different story altogether. So Lindsey Graham, I'll give you, it's interesting. Most people that hear this probably will not realize we're talking about Lindsey Graham, the podcast extraordinaire, and not the senator who is also a Republican and might draw a lot of emotions out of people when you say his name. This Lindsey Graham has done a lot of work with Wondery. He's made shows like American History Tellers, 1865. There's he's really telling the stories of this country in ways that are really interesting. I mean, he's got a heavy focus on high quality production. He does a lot of the voices himself, and he doesn't try to get too carried away in like interpretive voices. It's more like, no, I'm going to talk as though I were saying the thing that I'm saying. And he's found a way to package history in a way that I think people can really find compelling, because he's using story structure and he's making it entertaining. And so it was really fascinating to talk to him. I think, we may or may not be able to play a clip from him. But, one of the things I appreciate about Lindsey is that he is somebody that is trying to use his area of specialization, and in his case, history. He's trying to use it not as a way to point a finger or to judge or to bring you to his side of the political spectrum, but rather he's trying to use history as a way to teach empathy, to teach understanding, and to understand how did we get to where we are today. And I will tell you, the state of the world since March of 2020 has been such that I think it's comforting to look at other periods of history. I think that it really helps. I think he's doing a real service to people that can understand this is not the first time that, people have been concerned about the Constitution. This is not the first time in human history that people have been at each other's throats. There's a lot that's happening today that we've seen. I'll keep parroting the Mark Twain line, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And he's telling us a lot of things that are happening today and what they rhyme with in the past. And I think it's actually settling for a lot of people to know that somebody's gone through stuff like this before. It's not the first time, and it's not maybe as out of control as it might feel. What was your perspective?
What I didn't know about Lindsey Graham was that he writes ad copy. And I loved that part of the episode, to really get into like the ins and outs of what makes an ad work, what makes it personable, what makes the audience really feel like they could relate to it, to dive into how to position a product, how to sell a product. That was like a very small portion of the conversation, but I thought, especially for the audience that we have and the people on our team who I know really have dedicated so much of their time and their effort to do this on behalf of brands, like that was my favorite part of the episode. So a sliver inside, but a gem, I think.
Well, and for people that might want to check him out for listening or for sponsorship, it's hard because there isn't a Lindsey Graham network, Lindsey Graham, the podcaster network, right? So
Right.
You would find a lot of his work through Wondery, and his production company is called Airship, and he's now doing like a daily history show. He's done a lot of good work. His body of work is very impressive. He's had a lot of hits. I mean, also remember, this guy helped produce Dr. Death and I believe Dirty John and, some of the really big shows that are out there. This guy's been a part of it. So when you see the name Lindsey Graham, don't think about the U.S. Senator in the podcast world. You think about a guy who is synonymous with high quality, with telling true stories, and in doing so in a way that is entertaining while you're being informed and educated, but that your eyes will be open to different perspectives through listening and through sponsorship. This is not one where you're going to get where you're going to get a lot of controversial emails, most likely. So big fan, definitely a must buy on Lindsey Graham products.
And then Amy Westerville from Critical Frequency. This was probably if not my favorite, one of my favorites of the whole season. I think she is a person who has dedicated her life and created a network to really champion areas that she believes America needs a little bit more conversation about. Amy is really using her platform to share her values in a way that isn't combative, that isn't pushing an agenda. Rather, she's starting conversations around topics like oil drilling and climate change and elements that she believes are really important for the future of the country, and inviting people onto her shows and creating shows within her network to get those conversations started. And so if I had to pick one person that I believe is really living the Media Roundtable values, if it's not Amy, I'm not entirely sure who it would be. I really admire her and respect the work that she's doing, but most importantly, the way she's approaching it, I think takes discipline and takes a lot of homework and takes, you have to be brave.
So it was interesting. One of the best parts for me personally about doing the show, I mean, I talked about some of the kind of peace of mind benefits, but also, I get to geek out on a subject for like usually a week and sometimes a little more than a week, and become more educated on something I never understood. And I'll be honest, I've had, Al Gore's movie on my watch list for like 15 years, still haven't done it. And I feel like I was totally climate ignorant, and very much agnostic. I think this allowed me to go far deeper than I ever did before. And, you talk about Amy, she is very, very impressive because she's not just a journalist. She's also launched a network, and, she's won all kinds of awards, but she's going 100 miles deep into these subjects. I mean, I didn't even know there was such a thing as climate journalism. And, I think one of the takeaways for me is like, okay, as I researched and tried to get different perspectives in addition to Amy's, what I kind of felt like on climate is that there's a fringe of people that say there is no climate change, climate is not changing, and it doesn't matter, just pay attention to something else. Like, and then there's another constituency that's like, we're all going to die in the next couple of weeks, and the reason is because of your carbon footprint. And then there's a lot of people in the middle on that spectrum all across. I think that most of the things that are happening that people like Amy are pushing for seem like they're very helpful. And whether or not we're going to see the world burn in 10 years or hundreds of years, we don't exactly, nobody can really know that, and how much humans are contributing versus other factors. I don't think you can really be precise about these things, but it's kind of like, for us to treat these things as though they're as severe as being described, it might not hurt. Right. And so I think she, in her approach, one of the things we talked about was like the Overton window. And when does the public consciousness get to a point where you don't have to like tiptoe around the issue and just introduce it very gently? Like, are we in a position now as a country where it's like there's a common level of acceptance around this issue? And I think what her response to that was basically like, yeah, we've been too nice for too long, and now we need to be a lot more aggressive. And it's kind of like this activation of the base that she feels is will make a more profound impact on that movement, by really just being overt and making assumptions that most people may not be on board with, but she's okay with that. She's staked out a position. And gosh, when you look at some of the, like, one of the most, if you're going to listen to anything that she's done, on Drilled, for example, which is one of her series, she talks about PR in big oil, and the ways that that the media has been manipulated really since the time of like Rockefeller, when they started doing PR for companies. Like, that is where PR came from, and how a lot of the big oil dollars have been controlling a lot of the media narrative for a long time, and that was actually adopted by the tobacco industry. And we're now still seeing energy companies using a lot of the same types of strategies. For example, sponsorship of really reputable media products, things like the New York Times, things like PBS, things that you wouldn't really expect to be influenced by big energy or things like that. She's really identified in excruciating detail and told the stories of the way that the media has been manipulated, and therefore the kind of public consciousness about a lot of these issues have been manipulated. But you don't hear about that stuff when you're watching CNN or Fox and listening to a bunch of sound bites. And so what's beautiful about so many of the shows that we're dealing with and the networks that we're talking to is that instead of going a mile wide and an inch deep, you can go a mile deep on pretty much any subject. And she's a great example of that. Very compelling person, a network that is definitely worth sponsoring.
But also, you'll have to do your homework if you want to sponsor her network, because she's definitely doing hers. She goes a mile deep on any potential brand that wants ad sponsorship on a show, on the site, on the newsletter. And if you have any ghosts in your closet, she'll definitely find them, because she takes her reputation very, very seriously. And she's not about to take a dollar from somebody that isn't in line with her value set. So,
well, and I thought that was impressive because, like you said, I mean, she's taking grant money and paying for the network in a diverse, very deliberately diverse ways, instead of just going all ad supported. And look, we have an ad agency, so this is what we do. But at the same time, I respect somebody that's trying to diversify so they don't become too dependent. It's like in our business, you never want an account to represent more than 20% of your portfolio, because then they start becoming a boss and not a client or a partner. And in the same way, I think she's taken the approach of she's going to maintain her journalistic integrity by limiting how much she can be influenced by any one source of revenue. So very cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Okay, who's next?
Patrick Mcginnis.
Oh, Patrick Mcginnis. What do you think of Patrick?
So I will openly admit my bias here, because he and I share an office in New York that
you can't talk
that we only found out by having the same Zoom background. But no, I met him and I met his his sales team, and they're genuinely good people who are incredibly passionate about the interviews that they're putting out. They're very, very attached to communicating with their audience. They want to make sure they're giving their audience exactly what they want. They want to make sure that they are being true to the brands that they represent on the show. But at the end of the day, he's just a guy who's had some pretty significant professional success and is now dedicated to shining a light on others who are choosing to walk that path as well. And he's a genuinely interesting interviewee and an interesting interviewer. And I really enjoyed the conversation. So yeah, all positive. The only negative I have is it's sort of a neutral when it comes to the Media Roundtable, as he's not necessarily promoting any of the really strong values that we hold, but he's adhering to all of them. It's just the subject matter of his show doesn't put any of these things into contention. So in that regard, he's doing it the right way. Very safe sponsor for sure, and genuinely interesting conversationalist.
Well, and as Media Roundtable evolves and what we do evolves, you are seeing a shift, and I think you're pointing this out, from talking exclusively about polarization to seeing people that are doing good work that is that is achieving unity and is bringing people together across differences without being so overt or maybe even so deliberate. They may not even realize they're doing it, but I think this is a good example of one of those. Now, a couple of things to remember about Patrick Mcginnis is that his podcast is called FOMO Sapiens, because this is the dude that came up with the word FOMO. Like, he wrote that, I don't know, what was it, 15, 20 years ago in at Harvard. He's, so smart as anybody gets. This guy speaks a million languages. He's a Harvard grad and has worked on Wall Street and all that. But while he was there, he wrote a paper about FOMO, this phenomenon that people were so busy and just so motivated by the fear of missing out on things. And it's interesting because this is a guy who had this kind of weird thing that showed up in the dictionary 10 years later, and then people wanted to interview him about it. He wasn't really like trying to be the FOMO guy, and yet he found himself being the FOMO guy, but he had a career that was focused on a myriad of other things unrelated to FOMO. And so, the podcast, I think, takes the concept of fear of missing out, which is something I think we all struggle with increasingly, particularly, even since he coined the term, the fragmentation of media has made it so hard. It's like, try figuring out what you're going to stream tonight. You can spend forever just browsing. And we all struggle with this because we've never had so many choices to make decisions. That's not the only thing he talks about. I think he kind of falls within the genre of people that are trying to decode peak performers and things like that. I think the subject matter on his podcast runs the gamut. It all feels very brand safe. It's all very positive. It's all about growth and personal growth. But I do think that, just to boil it down to his focus on ways of managing FOMO is a very, very needed skill right now. It's very, very helpful for our mental health, because I think we all get a little crazy with being overwhelmed by so many options in everything that we do. You can't, you have so many choices, and it can be paralyzing. So the fact is, this is a guy that's kind of carved that out. He's the one that called it out to begin with, and he's carved out a bit of a niche where he he has writing and speaking and the podcast where he can give you tools to deal with that. And by the way, if you're a B2B advertiser, this is a guy that I think speaks well to the business community. So strong buy on that one. Definitely like Patrick, whether you guys share office space or not. I'm a fan.
I'm a fan as well. And I'm also a fan of what Nick and Lauren are trying to do with Were You Raised by Wolves? An entire show dedicated to trying to be more polite and civil to everyone around you in all interactions. I mean, this is like the Emily
needs now.
It was what the world needs now. They're the Emily Post of 2021. I mean, down to Nick talking about handwriting letters and all of the elements that they believe are critical for personal interaction and to try to keep everyone less self-centered and a little bit more others-centered, and what that means. I think listening to this interview was like taking your vitamins and just remembering that the stuff at the top of the list got moved to the bottom of the list at some point when we all got way too busy or way too focused on our own self and how we were handling COVID or what was going on. And I think it was a breath of fresh air to remind everybody in a polite way to put others first and do the right thing. They didn't come across as preachy. They didn't come across as standing on soapboxes or any of those things, but their message rang true to me. And whether you're hosting a party or interacting with your colleagues, I think it's they have some pointers of must-dos that I couldn't agree with more. So
yeah.
So actually, a very critical pre-Thanksgiving, heading into all of those tricky conversations and family dinners. I think the Were You Raised by Wolves might be a good refresh course. Listen to it on 2X if you're feeling particularly crushed for time. But
yeah, for sure. If you're a star student listening to this, the second it gets posted, you've got all of 24 hours before you get together with your family and get in fights. So Were You Raised by Wolves? Definitely a strong recommendation to listen. And I agree with everything that you're saying. You know, it's so fascinating what we get to be a part of. I mean, what a time to be alive. Like, there have been advice columns, you know, and kind of specialty content creation around different specialty subject matter experts, but it's like the whole library that normally most people don't have time to engage with. You know, it's like you could go deep in a subject through books, possibly, maybe magazines, and maybe print. But then you turn on the radio and you have like 5 choices and they're all playing like top 40 and talking about 2, you know, issues. Now it's all fanned out. It's so fragmented. And this is a group that has found a niche. They have carved out a position as the foremost manners giving forum in the podcast ecosystem among millions and millions of podcasts. Now, you know, 10 years ago, if I said I was going to do a manners podcast, you might be like, why? Nobody's
like, we have Dear Abby in the newspaper.
Yeah, but like, you know, and they're not the only ones we talked to this season, but pay attention to them, because imagine where this goes in 10 years. They've already built a great following and a great tribe. And you know, they're not trying to solve polarization, but they are trying to make people more compassionate and understand each other better and be patient and be thoughtful and be courteous and be kind. It's like, okay, all the Media Roundtable values kind of like compressed into, you know, one show, and they're funny, they're fun, and very, very thoughtful. I have 2 complaints about this program and these individuals. My first complaint is that I think the name is too far out there. I'm having to think too much when I hear the name. So as a marketer, like, I want something more simple. And then second of all, I wish that they had an app that I could bring with me everywhere that I go and get their advice on demand for every situation that I run into. I'm not saying I would consult with it, but I'd like to believe that it's there, that I could consult with it. But no, they are, look, you want brand safety, like, these are the manners people. So like the likelihood of offending, very small likelihood to offend on this.
They'd cancel themselves.
Yeah, they would apologize profusely if they ever thought that they upset somebody.
Be a handwritten note and email.
And don't get me started on the handwritten notes. I'm riddled with guilt because they told me that my automated way that I do handwritten notes through typing in my own handwriting doesn't fully count. I only get 70% of the credit for those as if I had just manually handwritten it like I used to do. So as somebody that believes in the handwritten note, I was a little deflated by that, but it speaks to the integrity of the program. What else are we talking about?
Megyn Kelly.
Oh, Megyn Kelly.
Megyn Kelly.
What do you think about Megyn Kelly?
I did not know what to think about Megyn Kelly. I was super excited.
Fox girl.
Yeah, she's coming from Fox. I self-professed haven't consistently watched Fox News in a really long time. And I think you hear so much about Megyn Kelly, and I think that it's easy to believe that she's saying those things to you because you just relate those things with her so closely. But it's so rare that you hear Megyn Kelly talk about herself in this way. And I was very, very pleasantly surprised. I thought she was a world-class professional in how she handled the interview. But where I was hesitant was I thought she was going to just deliver the information and really present, but she didn't. She was completely genuine. It felt like you were talking to a real person, not a TV personality. And the stories about how she's chosen to parent, not just to really be specific about her values, not just in the way that she lives, but in the way that she's raising her kids and in the way that she tries to address her audience. And you could tell, even in the interview, she was having sort of a personal struggle with how she wanted to present something, and it was visible, and she didn't try to hide it, and she talked us through it. And you could tell she puts her whole heart in trying to figure out where she stands. And by doing so, she is able to stand firmly and stand behind what she delivers in the end. And I think even just in that interview, she invited us into that process to see how it went. And it's easy to see her as a person that has strong opinions, but she has to have strong opinions, and her strong opinions are backed up by a lot of homework and a lot of soul searching. And she takes all of this very seriously. And I really respected her in the end of the interview. And I was very happy to get to know her a little bit more and to see that side of her.
Yeah. She's obviously very charming, very easy to like. And I didn't know, I mean, I only knew the tip of the iceberg about Megyn Kelly going into the, before prepping for the interview, but like her story is staggering if you think about it. Because, she was at Fox for so long, and she, had this whole Trump battle where she challenged him in a debate. She was moderating one of the presidential debates in the primary in 2016, and Trump went at her, and Trump dragged her for like 9 months on social media and said some things that, I don't think we should be proud of in this country, that, a president is saying about a reporter. She said her daughter asked her what a bimbo was because she had heard the president saying that about her mother, so now, in spite of that, she has gone on the record and said she thinks that, let's put it this way, she did not respond in kind to Donald Trump. She did not, she didn't hit back, and she didn't even move her position. She didn't become like anti-Trump. She was critical of Trump. She challenged Trump, but she did it in a way that I think she does with all politicians, and didn't let her personal experience bias her work as a journalist, which I thought was staggering.
That's
almost unprecedented, right?
Yeah.
And she's got this whole thing where, like, she's not, I don't think you would put her out as the leader of the feminist movement, and yet, she plays a critical role in taking down Roger Ailes from Fox News. She's played by Charlize Theron in a movie, and she she's got all this notoriety and could have been like poster girl, it girl during that period of time. She didn't really leverage that, but she did go to NBC. That didn't work out, and now she's kind of found her way into audio. We're happy to have her, but look, I'm probably a little biased because she was willing to answer a question directly for my oldest daughter and gave her some encouragement and advice. And my daughter wants to be a lawyer, and Megan's a lawyer, and and a strong woman and a strong voice. And I thought that was really, really touching. And I believed her. I believe that she cares, and I believe in her integrity as a practitioner, doing journalism in the way that is so, so rare, where your personal preferences, bias, um, and rewards or your incentives are not aligned with and instead you set all that aside and you just go after the truth. I feel like that's Megyn Kelly. And so I gained tremendous respect for her. In terms of advertising, she is somebody that you can now sponsor on YouTube, on podcast, and on Sirius XM, where she hosts a show Monday through Friday. She is not for everybody. Maybe not in the same way we might say that about somebody like Rudy Giuliani, but she is not for everybody, in that she is still going to attract controversy. You are not going to get people not to come at Megyn Kelly as long as she is successful at what she does. And so far, she's been very successful. That being said, I think that the reasons to avoid her as an advertiser are out of fear of what somebody might say, but not necessarily based on something she actually did or said with ill intent. I think that, we believe, we've kind of taken a position at Oxford Road that voices should be heard on all sides of issues, and that just because somebody said somebody should be canceled or not supported doesn't mean that that's necessarily true. There should be due process with all of these things, and we should value different perspectives. So whether or not you agree with Megyn Kelly where she comes down on issues, I do think she is very, very fair-minded. And if your business is allowing yourself to look at opportunities that talk about news issues and politics, she is absolutely somebody that is worth sponsoring and supporting. And she also, she says very candidly, like, I want advertisers with spines, not somebody that's going to read a tweet and immediately run for the hills. But she is very engaged with her sponsors and really enjoys customizing her work and getting involved in the copy and in the ads to make sure that they're persuasive for her partners in the advertising community. So a lot of great things to say about Megyn Kelly. I was very happy that we were able to have her on the show, and think that she's doing some good work. You're on mute.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And now to who I think was probably your favorite guest from a personal perspective.
Oh, really?
Dave Mays.
Was he my favorite? I do love Dave Mays.
Because you love rap music and you love hip hop and you love that whole community so much. And he's done such incredible things. And even just the stories he was able to tell, you could see your eyes light up in the interview. So that's why I say it, not in regards to playing favorites of anybody else, but just a personal connection to a lot of the work that he's done.
Well, let's talk about who Dave Mays is. So he's a guy he's a 19-year-old kid at Harvard, and he's selling, like, I think it was like Time magazine or something. He was selling a magazine in like a boiler room on the side, and decided he was going to create the world's largest hip hop media conglomerate. And he actually launched The Source magazine. The Source magazine became a pivotal, it was like the Rolling Stone of hip hop. And some of the things that stand out, which he talks about, and with he's now launched a podcast network called Breakbeat Media. And for example, one of the things they're doing is a documentary on their column they used to have in The Source magazine called Unsigned Talent, where they discovered artists like Biggie Smalls, like Eminem, DMX, Common. There's like this long list of legendary performers that they broke with one column in their magazine. I mean, you have to remember when there was the whole, for those of us that remember the 90s, there was this East Coast, West Coast rivalry in the hip hop community between Bad Boy Entertainment with Puff Daddy and Notorious B.I.G. and all that. And then there was Death Row with Suge Knight and, for a time, Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg and Tupac and all that. Well, that whole thing like became a public battle at the Source Awards. And you've got to think that this guy that we're talking to, Dave Mays, not only, he sold a six-figure sponsorship deal to Suge Knight, who goes on stage and then basically declares war on East Coast hip hop. And he's doing the seating chart, like trying to figure all that out and trying to figure out, like, how do I de-escalate this situation? Because people are killing each other, like they are murdering each other. And this is entertainment, right? Like that was unique to see that play out. And Dave was right at the center of it. And so, he's now launching a network. He has his own show, which is the Dave Mays Show on Breakbeat. But he's got a series of shows. Some of them are documentaries, some of them are talk and chat. And it's not all music focused, but it is focused on urban communities, a hip hop community, and very much a lifestyle brand of content. And so if you're somebody that is looking to, everybody made a million promises last year about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not everybody carries that through to their media schedules. This is an opportunity to do that, but it's also an opportunity to be a part of something that is, I think, very much in the zeitgeist of what people, he was obviously right in his prediction with The Source. Hip hop has taken over. And, I think they're poised to be very, very successful. And I think you can get in at the ground floor of this kind of thing. So very, very cool discussion. Great guy, humble guy, and somebody that I think wants to take his platform and his access to communities and do something positive for them.
Mm-hmm. I agree. He was super interesting. I wasn't fully aware of his story until I started researching, and was pretty blown away by the life that he built and what he's continuing to do. And we are really looking forward to more of the projects that he has coming out. I listened to the first episode of Don't Call Me White Girl, a podcast by Breakbeat Media, and I would say it's a must listen for sure. And now another must listen, Bridget Fedesi, my favorite before and after story. So Bridget, I love how honest Bridget is about all of the areas in which she,
all the things,
everything, like actually everything. But even especially about her story, like she's encountered some really big speed bumps, and she has been beaten by some of those speed bumps, and she's overcome all of it. And she's not trying to be fake about what her current story is, but rather she's using her platform to really shed light on people who have also had troubles or challenges in their life, and inviting them on to share their stories. And it is a podcast built around connection, and she is super funny, and she's very honest, and she's as real as it gets. Maybe a little controversial for sure, especially even like the merch in her online shop. She has some stuff that may make a few brands a little bit nervous, but it doesn't make her nervous, and you understand why she's doing it, and she puts herself out there all the way. And I think you have to really admire people who are that confident in themselves and know who they are.
Yeah, she probably, she's probably not G-rated, she's probably PG-13 might be a better rating for her. And we will have the ability to give you those types of ratings probably next year. But right now we're just kind of going off the cuff. Anyway, but what's so great about her, I agree with everything that you said. She, Bridget and Walk-ins Welcome, which by the way is also a podcast, one podcast. She is somebody who is, she's empowered, she's vulnerable, and she's very, very humble. But there's a few things that are really impressive to me about Bridget that you can't say about other people. I don't know if we've talked to anybody that is as closely connected to their audience as Bridget. She has created a community that she is in perpetual contact with. She had somebody in her community pass away. She never met the individual, but they were active on through her forums. And they, she held a memorial service for this individual when they passed away. Like she is so,
and it was well attended.
So she really takes the community, and that's what's so like podcast is such a powerful channel. The spoken word is so powerful because we can go so much deeper than in other channels. And she has found a way to leverage her community and find offshoots so she can keep the conversation going in ways that I don't think you see with other people. Now, politically, she's a writer, a comedian. She does a number of different things. But one of the things she did is she wrote an article called The Battle Cry of the Politically Homeless. And basically, she has felt, and I think there are many of us who have felt this way, that we just don't really have a party that we feel great about supporting. And how can we come together and still live our lives in this environment where everybody wants you to pick a side? And I'm not against picking sides, but we haven't, not all of us like the sides that we get to pick from right now. And
Yeah.
she's somebody that has been a voice piece. I think she's been called in the media like Girl Joe Rogan. But she's, she will not, she is not a Trump supporter. She's not a Biden supporter. She's just trying to do her best. And she is very open about the fact that she's in recovery, and she takes a lot of the 12-step principles and tries to apply those to other situations, including how do you deal with the world that we currently live in. And I think that there's just a lot of good, healthy stuff. I feel like she's somebody that if you watch her, she's going to keep growing as a human, and her work is going to keep getting better. And I think you can even trace that in her career. And so I think she's doing a lot of good for a lot of people. She is fun. She's kind of, she's kind of the bad girl in the back of the class who's found herself now kind of leading her own little movement. But I think it's a good one. I think it's a healthy one. I think she's going in the right direction. So if you can stomach a little bit of PG-13, we would strongly recommend that you try Walk-Ins Welcome, or, her YouTube show, which is called Dumpster Fire.
Yeah, well, and whether or not as a brand marketer you could put your money into her podcast, I think you would definitely want to know her as a person. And so in that regard, Dumpster Fire, Walk-Ins Welcome, worth a listen. And if you're able to, definitely worth a sponsorship. So moving on to Julio Ricardo Varela, who was a sneak attack in this season and came with some of the most powerful data points we had in the entire season so far. I mean, some of the stuff that he was sharing that we shared in his episode 2 weeks ago about the Latino community and how influential that audience is and why brands and advertisers need to be there. And then the sneak attack of letting us know that Oprah's been promoting his episode and his network as a leading voice within the Latino community. We were very honored to have him on our show. And I thought he was going to be a lot more serious than he was, just knowing how established he was within his network and how impressive he was personally. He's a third Harvard graduate in this list, but he graduated cum laude, and he has not stopped since his graduation and has really built a community around supporting Latino voices that need more exposure and stories that need more exposure. And he came and walked us through his entire network and his plan and why he does it and some of his favorite stories within his audience. And it was sort of the sneak attack episode for me of the season. I don't know why I didn't expect it, probably because I hadn't really known who he was before he came on, but he left me very impressed.
Yeah, he was awesome. It reminds me of the Critical Frequency Network in that he's carved out a niche and established a leadership position. And because we know the industry continues to grow, pay attention to where he's at in 5 to 10 years. But we've had some smarties on this.
I know.
I like Harvard grads.
Anyway. We have at least 3.
Yeah, unbelievable. So, so the thing with Julio, I actually thought we were going to get into more issues that the Latino community is facing. But, I think, and I learned a lot about that in the prep for the episode, but if you listen, I think we talk more about the business, and it was really fascinating because he kind of articulated the fact that, like, listen, I've been in media most of my career, and you've got Univision, and you've got a lot of like Spanish language radio formats, right? And now you've got this, this 2.0 version of radio, which we call podcast. And he found that English speaking Latinos were very much underserved. And he said, I'm going to do something about that. And he's figured out a way. I mean, he's been doing this for over a decade. And now he is a big player at Futuro Media. He's one of the executives there now. And they really seem to have that part of the marketplace locked up. They believe in what they're doing. Now, one of the things that I think came up that was interesting from a journalistic integrity standpoint, and this is not the first person we've heard this from, but one of the things he said I thought was interesting, and I want your take on, is he said we're kind of in this world of like post two sides of a story. Now, I did think that was interesting, and this is not, I'm not attacking it, because I still think what he is creating is worth sponsoring, but I think that's an issue we're talking about. We have talked to a number of people that say the old rules of journalism that you need to get point counterpoint, which was kind of the premise of the fairness doctrine, that we don't really need that anymore. And like some truths are self-evident so that you don't need to do that. Do you have a perspective? Because, you know, hearing from different sides of an issue is part of our values at the Media Roundtable. And it was something he very unabashedly said that he doesn't subscribe to. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky one, because a lot of times when you're only hearing one side of the story, you're hearing sort of a truncated version. And so the facts may be true, but they may not be presented within the full context of what that truth means. And that's why historically, I think hearing both sides of the story really helps to solve for that, because you could present an entire story to an audience, but you could present an entire point. I may be trying to convince you of one thing, but by using this puzzle piece and this puzzle piece and this puzzle piece, it creates a much stronger story than using all 10 of the puzzle pieces, just the 3. And so I think that I think that it can be done, but it's challenging. But he challenged us in the right ways. His main point was, people don't come to me for the other side. They come to me for this side. And so I'm going to do the best job I can to present this side. And so as long as you're using the entire puzzle pieces to present your side, I think that that's okay. It's just when you're editing and photoshopping and clipping together bits and pieces that are in fact truthful but not fully contextualized, I think it could be very dangerous. And so counter programming sort of solves for that in an easy way. You have to be more disciplined to do it in the right way. But I do believe that his approach is fully within the contextualization of each of the stories. And I trust that his intent is always there. But yeah, I mean, it definitely challenged me, and I know it challenged you, and it challenged us. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's the whole point of the show, right? To hear other perspectives and to challenge what our thought process is. And I don't think he's wrong.
Well, I'm not ready to remove the value, I don't think, which would be, you know, fairness and coverage of divergent points of view. But what I do think is, you know, to his credit, first of all, like, you can't give two sides of every issue, or else you're going to be debating like gravity and like, do we even exist? And so you know, there's got to be some rationale. I think we'd have to look at in a very practical way at like, okay, so what's an issue that, you know, if you were an expert on this, you would go, there's a whole nother side that's not being talked about here, and it's reasonable.
Yeah.
You know, I would hope that in that type of situation, and we'd have to do a deeper analysis than we've done to know if he's doing that, we'd hope that there'd be representation. That being said, you know, I also think that we can give a little more latitude for advocacy journalism, who are addressing issues that have not received national media attention at scale. When mainstream publications are not focusing on an issue, you're going to have you're going to have a resistance group. You're going to have advocates, and they're really going to be focused on key issues and not really necessarily interested in the other side of that issue, because the other side of the issue may be the status quo in society. And so as you're challenging that, you're going to be more focused on presenting your side of that argument, because that is the side that has been underrepresented historically. It's just in this crazy fragmented world we live in, that may be the entirety of your show. But as it feeds into the kind of broader conversation, you know, I think it can be valuable, but all of these things have to be taken. Look, I think this is a great reason why all of us, whatever subjects we are most interested in, why we should hear from diverse sources. This is why you talk to people on different sides of an issue, even if you disagree with them. So you never assume that you have the corner on truth, and turns out, you were just in an echo chamber. So I think, as a creator, hopefully he's, when it matters, he's given two sides. But as a consumer or as a sponsor, I think it's just a good note for us to make sure we're considering different points of view. Which brings us to our last show, which I also have some very positive feelings about. I'll just say who it is. Meta Sandiford Artest, aka Ron Artest, aka Meta World Peace, is what I think most people know him as. He was our final guest, also Podcast One alum. And I got to tell you, I don't care about basketball like at all, but I love Meta Sandiford Artest. I thought he was awesome, and I don't think this is his explicit intent, but I feel like he is somebody that's actually living a lot of our values in very unorthodox ways. Why don't you give me your perspective a little bit, and I can share some anecdotes that I took out of that discussion.
No, I think Meta was interesting to me because he is sort of like the most Renaissance man character on the entire season. He has his hands in a lot of different elements. He has his Panda clothing line. He does a lot of work in the mental health space. He's launching a basketball league. He's really active within his community. He has a podcast, and he's really dedicated to helping younger players understand their finances in order to make sure they make sort of responsible decisions to set themselves up well for the future. He is not afraid to dive into hard topics, whether that be what the work that he's doing with mental health, but also like he's calling himself out. And he referenced that story about how he spoke to the gentleman who threw the cup and how they were able to make peace in the end, and what it cost him and everything he had to overcome, both from a reputation and a financial standpoint, in order to do that. And so
can I just pause there for a second? Because I want to give some context for people that may not realize. So if you go on Netflix, there's a documentary called Malice at the Palace, in case you forgot about this event. But I believe it was 2007, maybe. Meta was playing for, at the time, Ron Artest, playing for the Indiana Pacers. He's in my home state of Michigan at the Palace of Auburn Hills, playing the Detroit Pistons. He gets upset in the middle of the game and goes and lays on the scorekeeper's table. And some dude in the crowd hurls his Coke cup across the stadium. It lands on Meta. He charges the stands and starts punching the members of the audience, and then starts fighting people on the court. This has never happened before. And I'd imagine that everybody that's ever performed in some small way has wanted to do this, but he's the only person that actually did it. And they did a whole documentary about it and how it cost the Pacers a likely championship. It cost him between $50 and $100 million. So when you're talking about this, I just want to make sure that that the audience understands this was a big deal that he was a part of. This was unprecedented, longest suspension in the history of the NBA. And this dude he calls the guy that threw the Coke at him and makes peace with him. I mean, that was pretty fucking impressive, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to hold on to that, and it's easy to turn yourself into the victim of that, and it's easy to do so many things, and it is really hard to address it head on and dive into it and work it out and apologize, take ownership for your part in it, and sort of express that in a way that feels equal and fair, and close that chapter. And I think, like, if anybody's putting them into practice, that's the best you could ask for, right?
Yeah. So totally felt that he was very much in line with our values. I mean, to your point about mental health, he ended up getting a championship ring with the Lakers, sells it for like $700,000, gives all that money away to mental health nonprofits. And he's like, this is somebody who has, kind of been there, done that, been wild, tested all the boundaries, and come back around and settled down. And his next chapter of life I think is one where he's making a very positive contribution and using his platform for good. And also a great conversation about birth order theory, which most of you know I'm a big believer in. Anyway, as a middle child trying to bring world peace, it's unsurprising. But no, I thought interesting guy, cool guy, great way to end the season for our guests, and somebody that I think that is definitely worthy of consideration for sponsorship. Has he had sponsor problems in the past, like when he lost all of his sponsors overnight in 2007? Yes, but he's not acting that way anymore. This is a guy that's really, if you're somebody that believes in second chances, this is somebody that I think has gotten a second chance and is doing good work with it. So worth a listen to the conversation and worth supporting the work that he's doing. Mm-hmm. So, Jennifer, what are we doing next year?
Well, I'm pleased to say we're doing more of what we've been doing this year. We're continuing down the road of really introducing you guys to podcast guests and network executives and owners and sharing their content with you. I think we're really making sure that we are making other voices heard. This episode, we definitely haven't. We've only been listening to ourselves, but we have really gotten to know so many people that we wouldn't have otherwise, and we're really able to share so many people that maybe you wouldn't have known before, some content you wouldn't have been familiar with before. And that's our goal and that's our aim, and we're going to continue into next year. We've already had some interviews that we've been recorded that we'll have to sit on for a month and a half that are really good, that we can't. And we're excited to come back in the first or second week of January and share some interviews that we've already had with journalists and other podcast hosts. And we can't wait for you to hear more about those, and also to fully be able to share the project that we've been working on that Dan referenced and I referenced as it relates to podcast content and brand suitability and some sort of rating system. And we are eagerly awaiting the date we're able to share that.
Is it appropriate for us to say who our first guest is in the new year, or should we hold off on that?
I think we hold off.
All right, you don't get to know yet. You don't get to, you just have to live with the uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, they do know who this person is. They just don't get to know who it is.
Don't get to know who the individual is going to be. But no, this is somebody we've been trying to have on for a long time because I think it's going to be a great conversation. Jennifer, I'm going to tee up some of the kind of final closing points here, but what I want to ask the audience for is more feedback. I think in this inspired by Bridget Fetisi, we want to have a closer relationship with you all that give your time and attention to what we're trying to make for you here, and we want to keep making it better and better. And we want to know what you think, what you feel, what you like, what you don't like. So what email should they send that to?
I think they should send it directly to me, actually. Let's open ourselves up all the way. And you can send it definitely to info@mediaroundtable.com, but I would love to hear from you directly. I'll share it with Dan, Jennifer@oxfordroad.com. And don't be afraid to tell me exactly what you think, where we're doing well, where we're failing, who you want to have on the show, who you wish we didn't have on the show. Any and all feedback is welcome for us, and not just welcome, eagerly anticipated, because in the spirit of the holiday we have coming up, we are immensely grateful and thankful for all of you, our listeners, for sticking through season 4 with us. And as our subscribers continue to grow, we continue to become more awed and grateful for everybody that tunes in on Wednesdays and listens to the hosts that we're inviting on to share a little bit about themselves.
Thank you. And as always, just to reiterate, this show is dedicated to our mission. And what is that mission? It is to mobilize marketers to promote truth and civility in journalism. And the values, as we talked about, you can check them out at MediaRoundtable.com, but they include clarity, truth, fairness, respect, de-escalation, and tolerance. And we have very precise definitions of these things and how they manifest in media. So do check that out at MediaRoundtable.com. Always follow us everywhere that you follow shows, whether that is iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you like to listen. We're doing a lot more on YouTube. Actually, YouTube's been growing like crazy for us. And look, if you're a marketer and you want to talk to Oxford Road, our ad agency, we can help you with things like podcast and other audio channels as our core specialization, so that you can balance your business objectives and your brand values. Not an easy thing to do in today's day and age, but this is something where I think we've really, where we're really leading the charge in the industry, and we'd love to talk to you. And of course, when you go to oxfordroad.com to learn about that, make sure you subscribe to our weekly newsletter, which is called The Influencer. And in the spirit of Thanksgiving, I want to thank you all so much for spending this time with us. We will be back again early January. It's going to be exciting. We're going to do a lot of good work together. So thanks for being a part of that. And I am especially grateful to Bianca, to Kyle, to the team at Podcast One, and to you, Jennifer, for all of the blood, sweat, toil, and tears that you've been putting into this thing. We'll see you next year. And as always, what do we say?
Influence responsibly.
Boom. See you later, guys.